Hopefully. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Perception and Action Journal Club. Today, we're doing something really different, I think, than we've done before. I hope some fun for people. I'm looking forward to it myself. What we're going to do today is I'm calling it practice activity analysis. So we have a bunch of videos of practice activities that some of us have brought along ourselves. Some people have submitted to me, a couple I found online. That what we're going to do is show them and just talk about them. You know, what kind of principles do they illustrate of good practice design? What might we change? Another thing I thought we could talk about, guys, is, what would, if you were doing this drill and it didn't work, it wasn't working, or you weren't getting the results, what might we do? Yeah, if there's any thoughts we had on that kind of thing. Where do we go next? I think that's a lot of issues I have on. So joining me, I'll let everybody go around the table. I have a couple of regulars for this, and someone I've been on the podcast before, not in a long time, so I'll start with him. I'll let you introduce yourself, Danny, first.
Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon. Danny, great to be on again. And I guess the lure of looking at actual practices and unpicking them was too much for me to resist. So yeah, excited to get going.
Yeah. And then down right below him on my screen, Stuart.
Yeah, great to be back. Good to see Danny. Haven't seen him for a long time. Last time I saw him, we were running around a sports hall pretending to throw a ball to each other, and I was getting tagged. And nice to be back with you, Rob and Marianne.
Yes. And last but not least, Marianne.
Hi, Marianne. I'm really interested in this. I think, like Danny said, the lure of being able to actually have a look at something in practice and then being able to discuss it with such a great panel was definitely far too much for me.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great way to. A lot of things I think we see in this field are getting to the point where we really need to illustrate them in specific cases, for people to really understand it better. So hopefully we can do that with this. So I'm going to work on sharing these videos. Hopefully we can get them. So we're going to start with one. Let me see if I can get this to work. I don't know how big of a size I can get this one to be. So this is a tennis example. This is a pretty good tennis player doing this. Can you guys hear the sound on that?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah. I don't know if it matters for this, but. Okay. All right. So I think we get the basic idea. So, leave it with the dog photo. Danny, did you want to have a first comment on what's going on there? Since you brought it. Yeah.
We use this one with our students. I just thought it'd be interesting to talk about, really. And we sort of, for me, it floats the question around intention, which I don't know what it is because I'm not the coach or the guys, but it's a really interesting question about what do you think the intention of this practice is? What are the gains that you might get from it? And then also I think it creates some interesting questions around the trade-offs and the decisions you've got to make around representative design, which I think is quite interesting. So the sort of first thing that gets picked out is obviously the rule changes or the key task constraint manipulations are the shortened pitch. So obviously they've cut part of the pitch out, and then the fact you have to play the ball down on your side before it goes over the net and plays to the other side. So it's interesting to think, like, what is the intention behind that and what's driving that. I was interested in what you guys thought first before I chuck my hat in the ring.
Yeah. So Stuart, do you want to go next?
I always thought that this was primarily more about movement and a way of challenging the athlete to move in a certain way, because it's obviously very demanding. There's obviously elements around racket manipulation and all those sorts of things, but in particular, because there's opportunities for the ball to be played with like real angles and all those sorts of things. It requires, and if you watch it, you see a lot of massive movements, lunges, great big strides being played. And I felt like it was more in the physical realm as and my initial thought was, if I was to utilize an activity like that, the primary goal would be, let's get used to using the racket a little bit, but predominantly it's about how do we move around the court to be able to play shots. That would have been my first thought.
Mm-hmm. Marianne, did you?
Yeah, it's a great one to be sent over, because I looked at it at first and just went, duh, what are they doing? So different. It's like table tennis on a tennis court, isn't it? That change of rule. And watching it, thinking a little bit along the lines of Stu, actually, that it's getting them to move around, but also it's almost a way of training those net drop shots without having to be at the net. Because that's kind of where you would play that, isn't it? You're not in a real game. You're not going to bounce the ball on your own side first. But so it's quite interesting. And like Danny says, that sort of, that challenge of representative design versus setting something up that disrupts normal patterns and then forces a different way of moving, being more creative, being more physically active, doing different things with your racket. And not being a tennis coach, I'm kind of thinking, where would I see that going? Is that, would seeing that back in the game be them moving around more effectively and being able to play those up to the net shots that are gonna, get them points? So that's my start over 6.
Yeah, I'll throw in mine. Obviously it's a constraints-led approach. We're changing the task constraint of the rule of making you bounce the ball first. When we talk about constraints, we talk about taking away something, a solution. To me, what I see here is you're taking away power as a way to beat your opponent, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can't beat the other player by hitting the ball harder when you do that. You have to beat it by placement and angle and movement. So to me, that's getting people to explore and like Stuart said, different movements and different things to try to beat your opponent by taking something away. But you're right. Your representative points, like you're teaching people to do a stroke that could have potentially negative transfer, right? It's a stroke you never want to do in an actual match, or it would be, you'd lose a point, right? Hitting a ball deliberately onto your side of the court. So you're right. This breaking representativeness is an interesting concept. And it's something I think, we've been trying to emphasize. You're not always trying to make everything exactly like competition. Sometimes you deliberately make something that's not like it at all. And it's, if you have a purpose like this, I think it can be valuable.
Yeah, and I'll pick up on that, Rob. Whenever we remove the game from its fullest form, or change the game in any way from its full performance sort of, I guess, features, we are losing some of the representation of the full task. And I guess we are doing that to, like you said, exaggerate other things, invite certain things within the game, or cut certain bits out of the game to practice it. And as long as we are kind of okay and comfortable with that trade-off, then I think we're okay. And I think that's the key thing that researchers, coaches need to understand. The action fidelity thing I think is interesting. So I look at it and go, whilst the hand movements are not probably faithful to the performance environment, the footwork and the leg movement looks to me like movements that are really faithful to what it would look like moving around at the front of the net. And then the other one is the principle of dexterity, and sort of having to be really creative with the racket head, really go probably further than they would normally in terms of having to manipulate the wrist and the hand, which might generate a greater awareness, a greater level of touch, so that when they transfer back into the performance environment, then that's developed as well. And I like your point, Rob, around we removed power, so we might actually push the focus towards some strategy elements. It starts, if you watch this on, the next rally goes on for ages. It starts to become really strategic, and as they move the opponent around the court, which is really interesting as well. So, yeah, I reckon what you might take away with the task constraint, you might be exaggerating other things which are really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
I just picking up on what Danny was saying there around the strategy side. The other aspect, and it links to what you were saying about the size of the court, is they're obviously playing within sort of the service box type area. Therefore, they've got a short but wide box. So intent here must be, and like you say, you take power away because you've got to hit the ball into the ground. So the intent must be that if you are going to, if there was any technical elements, it would be around the dexterity of being able to play angles and narrow angles that then A, require movement in order to recover, but B, demand the ability to physically do so. So it would require, extremely supple wrists, but also some real strength in the wrist. So I think there's, if there is a technical element to this, then that's probably where that would be found, I would have thought.
It also looks fun.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd play it forever.
Marianne, did you have any?
That's interesting. The idea of that strength, and that when Stu said that, it just made me think about when we look at those sort of rate limiters, or how we're building maybe some of the capacity. Like, can we build like extra power or strength into a certain bit in a way? Really, really interesting.
I'd have been interested to use different types of ball.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And see how the game changed with a different ball, either different size or a different bounce capability on the ball. Like, for example, they use bigger but much lower pressure balls for children that don't bounce as much, and what that did in terms of the demands and the challenge.
Yeah. And I would be whenever there's a task like this that's quite far from the real thing, like low fit. What I would like to do is right after you do this, put it back into closer. So after I did this, I'd want to practice the thing that Marianne described, the rallying at the net, where you're doing the closer to the real thing that you were trying to improve in the first place. So they can kind of put it back in the real thing and not end on that. That's what I always. So whenever you go too far away, I like to finish with put it all back together in the real action.
Because that's kind of what I was thinking. It's an opportunity to practice that, what you would do, that volleying at the net without always having to be at the net. So it's, but again, like I say, I'm not an expert at tennis, but I was like, that's a really cool way to do that. Yeah.
So, okay. So let me see if I can find another one here. This was a volleyball one that was sent in. Let me see. So obviously, one point we tried to make when we were setting this up is obviously part of this is you need to know what the coach's intention was, right? The rationale for the design, and when you don't have that, you're speculating. But that is important. So sometimes we get judgmental about things we see on Twitter and without knowing what the coach was trying to achieve. Okay, let me get this one up ready here. So this is essentially once I get this one working. So I'm going to show you the video, and I have some words that the person that submitted it. So this is, so you guys can see, let me share this. Here we go. So this is a small-sided volleyball practice. Okay. Let's see. Okay, I'm not sure. Okay, let me read some of the. Okay, so we have small-sided volleyball. So we're playing 2-on-2, modified court size. Did they make additional rules? They changed the rules in terms of when you miss a serve, you lose a point. If you make an unforced error, there's also a kind of a plus-minus point. They're not allowed to use the traditional pass, dig, set sequence at any point in the rally. Okay, so they have to use kind of a different pattern. The emphasis tends on focus on the second and third contacts, where players are being encouraged to explore overhand setting, something most non-setters are often hesitant to do. So there's, they mentioned that when they show this to people with volleyball experience, they think they're crazy, other volleyball coaches, but their players actually love it doing it. So So any thoughts on this one?
Can we watch it back again, Rob?
Sure.
Is it possible?
Yeah.
Because now I've heard that, I'm going to watch it with different eyes.
Yeah, me too. I missed the part about. I'll just maybe if I continue playing it.
So this for me,
yeah,
it's just a really cool example of someone adding more intention and purpose to what is a small-sided game or equivalent within their sport. So one of the things I've noticed a lot in hockey and football and rugby, there's been a lot of a shift to game-based approaches, but a lot of what I call under-constraining, which almost not doing enough to the practice environment to facilitate a specific intention.
Mm-hmm.
So I love this kind of like, and it would sort of challenge the representative design a little bit by saying you're not allowed to do a certain sequence of actions, because actually that sequence might be the right decision there and then. But by doing that, you're forcing them to, and sort of disturbing the system for them to generate a different set of actions they might not normally use. So part of the problem I find with players within small-sided games is they just revert to doing the actions they like and are good at, and sort of look for those opportunities in the environment, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it potentially might stop them searching for new and innovative solutions. So sometimes we have to put some task constraints on the game to disturb those learners and sort of force them to go, right, I can't use my normal solution. I've got to come up with something new here within the new rule set. So yeah, I don't know who sent this in, but it's just a cool way of using different rules and point scoring systems to unsettle and create solutions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess you're not in that clip stretch I showed. You're not seeing them really take advantage of it, but that's what is kind of the description of it. Yeah. Do you use that kind of approach? Anyone else? This is kind of where you make a, I've always been hesitant to just use verbal constraints. You can't do that. I always find that you're right, Danny. Once a person gets into the situation, it's hard to get them to not ignore you and just do what they're told. But I guess you're right. If you set up a scoring system and rule system,
yeah. I mean, I in general will try, and this is something Danny taught me actually, which is I would try and revert. So instead of saying you can't do this, you get more for doing that.
Okay.
So there might be a pattern here, for example, a particular pattern of movements that's going to give them kind of additional bonus if they can make that work. Because I suppose one thing I noticed through watching the video, unless I've misunderstood what was in the document, is the actual action that's trying to be encouraged doesn't actually occur that often.
Mm-hmm.
So I suppose if there was something I was going to do to manipulate this activity, it would be something that would encourage the action to take place a little bit more often. So there was more opportunities for exploration for the athlete. Mm-hmm. I'm not quite sure what it would be yet, but that would be what I would be thinking about. Do
you think, though, just because we don't know I guess at what stage they're into re-pattern forming against this new set of rules? Yeah. So like you could find they're in that really clunky, horrible phase at the start where they're just error strewn and it's not
sure.
They're not fun. So I agree with your point. If we're still here in 15, 20 minutes, we might want to do something for the game to re-encourage. But yeah, it's interesting. I was definitely let it breathe would be one of my sayings to start with. Like let's let them pattern form and see what solutions they drift towards and give them a bit of space. But yeah, they may have been here for half an hour, so your point might be really valid.
Mm-hmm. And as a coach, right, sometimes we talk about not stepping in and not correcting, but I think stepping in to remind people of the rules and the new constraints, that's fine. You just don't want to step in and say you should have, and tell them what they should have been doing. Yeah. So, Marianne?
Yes, this is, and again, it's a very different sport to what I'm used to. But the first thing that I thought about with that was the initial rules. I felt like that was in making sure that they got a rally, that something happened to get them to the point where maybe they were using the skills they wanted. So they didn't want people to just, go for a point initially. So by having that penalty as well as a point was interesting. So it just made me think that obviously they wanted to get past that particular part of the game. And I don't know if I misread it when I looked at the thing. They swapped over, didn't they? So they were getting them to change partners and change positions. Mm-hmm. And that I thought that was really interesting because, sort of thinking about, working as a team with it, or in places with these kind of sports where having an understanding of other positions maybe that you wouldn't normally play is really useful in recognizing those affordances that somebody else would want to see from you. So I don't know if I misread that in that, but I thought they swapped over a lot into positions.
Yeah, I think they did.
Which I thought was really neat part of it as well.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point there. And yeah, learning kind of the affordances of your teammates and the action capabilities of your other teammates and things is a valuable one. Yeah, this is something sometimes I see. I'm not saying this at all about this particular drill, but sometimes I see, really good activities that are representative, perception, action, coupled action, fidelity, but I'm not quite sure why exactly they're doing it. Right? What's the end goal? What are you trying to see? Like, are you just filling up the practice hours with things that are good, or is there something specific you want to see in terms of the outcome of the movement? I think that sometimes is an issue. Before we move on, we have a question I'll put up here that I think relates kind of the first this kind of issue of representativeness.
Here he comes.
Okay, Ben Frank, we got Ben's in here.
This is like the Jedi and the Padawan, isn't it?
Not over, that's for sure.
So when to do the trade-off between representativeness and exploration, and how they rationalize those decisions?
So I've kind of mellowed, I guess, a little bit. I used to be on a and I've got a bit more pragmatic with it, just through looking at some of these things. So I had a big problem with sort of two-touch restrictions, and like you said, almost removing options from players within environments to nudge them, and because it almost creates non-representative decisions and certain issues down the line. But with the group we've worked with this year, in one of the contexts I work in, we actually went to a two-touch rule for our players in the final third, and we knew it was bad for them, but we wanted to promote more movement off the ball through co-adaptation for the supporting players, because the group of players we had didn't have their super strength wasn't the ability to eliminate and manipulate players. Their super strength was to be able to pass and get around players. So it's a really interesting question. I've found I've sacrificed more representative design lately to go after more specific intentions within my practices. So whereas previously I've probably been a bit cautious of it, because I've sort of valued representative design more than disturbing the system. So yeah, it's just an interesting philosophical debate I've got going on. Sometimes, sorry, just a little bit. Sorry, so I can remember it. Sometimes some of the point scoring constraints I've put on to encourage don't have that much impact. And the data we've collected recently in a few studies at work shows that they have very little impact on the players on the pitch. It's the harder constraints which force them to do it that actually cause the change. So yeah, it's just an interesting philosophical discussion around that, really.
Yeah, I think I think some of the also the skill acquisition periodization kind of models are starting to get at some of these issues. How you scale up variability and representativeness. I think it's a super tricky point, but yeah, I think once you get a better understanding, I think like Keith was talking about this when I had him on, it's harder. It takes more skill to be less representative in an effective way as a coach. I think just letting people play is the easy thing to do. But I think that's. Any other thoughts on that? Anyone?
Well, just picking up on what Danny was saying. Mm-hmm. Firstly, Danny, thanks for all that stuff you taught me about constraining to afford. You've basically just put that in the bin, so thanks for that. That's good. You've basically thrown me under the bus there. Thanks a lot. No, but I take your point, because I think I've had the same. I've been definitely on the same exploration myself, which is how representative do you need to be, and when is how representative is enough. Because there is definitely times when you can be too representative. There's too much happening. There's too much going on. And so you haven't created the focal point. And like you say, sometimes the point scoring things don't create the focal point. They don't narrow the aperture close enough to sort of, goes back to what we were talking about with Duarte a few weeks ago, Rob, around the idea of the, you sometimes create these very clever manipulations, don't you? And you've got this, what I see as being this glaring invitation to act, and they're just not picking up on it. They're not seeing it. And so sometimes you do, instead of a hug or a nudge towards that, to use some behavioral psychology, sometimes you do need the shove, a little bit more. And that's where something like a slightly different constraint form might work more effectively. It's kind of interesting thing I'm exploring. Sorry, Dan.
Yeah, and it's just understanding that I think the 2-touch rule will not help players understand when and when not to pass the ball early. It's not helping them with their decision making at all, because it's removing it. And it's false, and the players don't like it. And they get a bit chewy. But it does force the players to co-adapt off the ball. So if my intention is the teammates making really clear passing options, then I make a decision as a coach that that's the priority, and I'm prepared to sacrifice the other thing.
It's probably worth mentioning your context is kind of quite close to high performance, isn't it? Or elite performance. Whereas in a more learning space, that's where something like that would probably be less utilized. In a more developmental, younger athlete space. It's probably worth mentioning, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I think context drives all those decisions, and an intention. Once you get it, once you have quite another lens to look through around represent design or instability or constraints, you can that helps you make the decisions you need to make. But it's just a trade-off. That's the key thing. It's always a trade-off.
Yeah, no, I agree, Danny. I think that's a good point. You can sometimes it can be representative for one part of one athlete or one pursuit. So the example I give sometimes in baseball. So in baseball, the old drill to train fielders is that you throw the ball up in your air out of your hand and hit it to them. Now we've realized if you get someone to toss it to the hitter and they hit it, the ball comes off with more realistic spin and trajectory like it's pitched. So that makes it more representative for the fielder, but not the hitter. The hitter still, it's a very low representative task, but the drill's activity is not designed to train the hitter. It's for the fielder. So I think that's a good point.
And interestingly on that one,
yeah,
the cues for the batsman would be more realistic if the ball's tossed towards them. So the fielders would then start to pick up someone to more. So that almost gets, even just making it a little bit more representative, would help the fielders for sure.
Yeah, definitely. The next one I want to show is, this is a soccer one, okay? And this is one that I found, so I'm not exactly sure. So this one, they're going to training. This is obviously a fullback defender clearing the ball with their head. What I think is interesting about this, one of the things is what the purpose of the goal, the frame is in this thing. It looks like when in just the static image, it looks like the goal, but you watch the way the player does the drill. It doesn't really, I don't think that's what they're trying to achieve with this. So I thought we'd start this. So what I think the tape and the poles are trying to get the player to head at a certain height, like over a certain height when they clear it. Make sure they clear it high enough. So it's not meant to represent a goal. It's meant to make sure they get it up. That's what I think it is, but. Yeah. So any thoughts on that one?
Which you want to in?
Sure. Jump right in. I know it's a very simple one, but.
I like it.
Yeah.
So for me, this speaks to me around some potential technical development, but using outcomes to drive the technical focus. So the outcome being you need to head the ball back over the top of the net would force the learner to then manipulate their body and position their body. Either obviously they were moving back on the first ones or moving forward on the second ones, but actually having that net really forces them to find solutions to head the ball up. So I think it's just a great use of a task constraint to shape movement would be my take on it. I don't know what the other guys think.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
Maria?
Sorry.
I very much the same as Danny, actually. I just thought it was a really neat way to have something really simple that encouraged a certain sort of movement outcome solution. It's an outcome rather than what they do, isn't it? To head the ball high to get it back out.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. That's a really interesting way. This idea of training technique, is a big thing. We in ecological approach. This is an example. I think, yeah, you're right. We're training technique. We're taking it out, really, really out of context, right? There's no other offender trying to get the ball. To me, at first I was like, wouldn't you want the goal? Like, you need to be able to clear a ball relative to where the goal is, right? It's important spatial reference. As a defender, you can't go back inside the goal and clear the ball. And all, to me, that's so they're taking those kind of pieces of context away, and they're just focusing on the movement to get the ball high enough. So I thought that was interesting. The other thing, one of the things I kind of like in this, I find really challenging, and this is around affordances kind of thing, is that I find difficult, and this is an issue in baseball I see too, is when you have to switch between two affordances, two actions for the same goal. So as a defender, when you have to clear the ball with your head versus your foot, how to know which one of those to do based on the position of the ball. So I'd be interesting if I would add some more of this. I would have some, if it's too short, then you clear it with your foot. If it's too high, you get it with your head. So you can learn to use the information to know to perceive those affordances. I think that would be an interesting twist.
I wonder if that's what the bar was for, to give a visual reference point as to when the ball is high, when the ball is low.
Yeah, it could be.
But I'm not sure why you would do that. I've just wondered if that was the purpose, because I couldn't quite work out the purpose either.
Yeah. I think it was just a reference for the action to get the ball over the bar. But yeah.
I don't think the tape was viewed as the goal. I think it was potentially this defender when they're heading the ball out isn't generating enough height on their clearances. So how do I shape the action? I create a task which requires them to achieve that, and therefore it will shape their movement. I agree. The question you posed, Rob, is interesting. How many variables are we including to this? So how tight is it? Are we going to mix the feed up? So sometimes it's foot, sometimes they've got to make that decision between short and long, which almost keeps them honest. Otherwise, if they always know where the ball's going, they can start to cheat the action a little bit, which I think is quite an interesting way. And the skill of the feeder, I think, is not underappreciated. I think in these types of practices, I always think like the tennis coaches are the best managers of affordances by the way they feed, by inviting certain shots or putting the ball in certain places, which means it's just out of reach or it's promoting the action they want to happen. So I wouldn't underestimate the skill of the feeder putting the ball in a position in order to...
That was an area for me that I wasn't so sure about because, well, firstly, it's an underarm throw and it's quite close. Whereas in reality, I assume that what's being trained here is either a clearance from somebody who's doing a throw in or somebody who, like a defender clearing like a goal kick, where the ball's coming from far greater distance with far more time and actually far more calibration to be done with the ball, how high the ball's coming, how far the ball's coming. And so for me, I think I would want to at least see the ball delivered with a foot. Now, I probably understand why it isn't accuracy, getting enough goes. I get it. But there's a part of me that thinks that's the one area, if you were going to do an activity like this, you've got very little variability from other performers, other athletes. You at least want something that's somehow going to mimic a realistic ball flight. Unless it's purely about the heading action and the physical action of heading the ball, in which case maybe it's a different thing.
Yeah. I think.
Go on, Rob.
I think it's a good, it's a really relatively low variability drill, right? You've taken tons of the variability out of it. The other opponent, you're right, Stuart, and on a long shot, there's going to be way more difficult to get under the ball. Where are you trying to place it if there's opponent? So it's a good example of a low variability drill that still has decision making, body movement. So I think it's a good example in that way. But right, you would want to quickly add a lot of this stuff in.
It could be worse. They could be feeding it out of a ball machine.
Yeah. And the person standing in the same spot every time and clearing. Yeah. So
no, I think, Rob, that was the bit that for me, I think is important. That would be something that you would see as just a small bit of the activity, and then very quickly look at, first of all, why are you doing it, and how can you quickly bring some more variability in there that is more representative of what they would be doing.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's something they do. So there's a game going on or there's a practice going on, we rip them out.
Yeah, you do whip them. So they're only doing a little bit and going out
and then straight back in again. Yeah, I agree.
Not spending ages doing that drill and then next week doing that.
Yeah.
You also find, I think, the context is interesting around like elite performers and full-time programs with lots of training time, that they have the time to do these types of practices that potentially in other contexts aren't, the bang's not worth the buck. So you sort of don't use them because they're a nice valid sort of add-on to get a little bit. So that for me is quite interesting as well.
Yeah, and if this is replacing something in the gym that's about developing a little bit more strength or coordination somewhere, then actually that's more representative than being doing whatever they might be doing in the gym. That's incredibly, so there's that, like you said, that repetition of something that allows them to develop effective strength and whatever it is in order to do that maneuver. So again, knowing what the coach wants from it, I think makes a big difference, doesn't it?
I'd have been inclined. So if I was to have designed that, and let's assume we had more players, because it may be that was the design done because it was a pure 1v1, one-on-one practice, right?
Mm-hmm.
But even in a one-on-one practice, you could have designed something similar, akin to the practice that we saw at the start with the tennis, where it's like the coach versus the athlete, and there's like a head tennis game going on or something. But then, and we don't know, that wasn't happening, by the way, but I'd have been inclined to use that tape and create a cross, and to have almost like a 4-square game of head tennis going on, where you've got to head to the side. You can like never head it back to wherever it came from. And I'd stretch it out. So they've really got to generate power to get it up and over and then head. That's the sort of thing I would do, because I'm always thinking about the engagement side. Again, I might lose some of the actual action fidelity, but I would feel like there'd be more they'd get more goes, and there'd be more realistic movement in a game like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I like Rob's idea of having a little bit more of that metastable state where they have to choose, do they kick it, do they head it, that it sits on that boundary of there's more than one option.
Yeah.
More option.
Yeah. And I think also I would say this is a good example of task simplification as opposed to decomposition, right? You're keeping the basic fundamental skill there, but and scaling everything down in terms of complexity and variability, but you're not like having the person head the ball with no purpose, right?
Or with their ball.
So, okay, Marianne, are you ready to be to look at yours? Marianne was brave enough to submit.
I was brave enough, yeah. COVID, like drag my pony out. I haven't ridden for 6 months.
I don't know which one is the. Let me see if we can get this one. I make these. Whoa! I'll turn my volume down here. Or me. Do we need the sound on this one, Marianne?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
My mother talks over most of them.
Is this a good one?
I think they're all okay. They're different. They're sort of like a couple that I just did this 4 times. So.
Okay. So do you want to set it up, or you want me to? Should I just play it and then we'll?
I don't mind.
Okay.
I'll do a quick setup. So this is It's actually an activity that a lot of people would use, but maybe in a slightly different way with a horse. And the idea is that because we can't tell them what to do, we can't give them any verbal instructions, and I'm trying to. So this is a horse that actually gets quite stiff in her canter. She'll end up with her quarters in and tends to rush. So I've set something up that she learns the rules, and then it's up to her to organize her own movement system around the game, as it were, the activity.
And the rules are, you mean by the placement of the obstacles in your...
Yeah, so I placed them on a a diamond shape, which hopefully gets her to pick a canter because they're poles, and to balance herself up in a curve where she has to organize her canter to get time to contact. And the idea of the cross pole is it just gives a specific point for her to aim for.
Okay.
That's nice and easy. And they're tiny, so she should just really canter hop, canter hop, canter hop. So it's not her jumping, it's working on her canter and her canter balance in a circle without me micromanaging it. So
in a way, could we analogize this to the famous long jumping study, right? Getting the variability of the placement of your feet. Yeah,
and allowing her to do that.
Okay. I mean, let's have a look here.
Of course, Snoopy's helping, chief coach.
Yeah. Good music.
Good music, yeah. I put music over this one because my mum talked all the way through it.
Oh, did she?
And as you go around, hopefully you'll see that she gets a little more even in, although they're not equal distance, so she can't just go 1, 2, 3, boing, 1, 2, 3, boing. I've placed them so they're not even.
So you want her to have a certain, rhythm.
I want her to have a rhythm, but she also needs to calibrate for each one individually.
Okay.
So the distance it's not big, but it's a little bit different. And I don't think it's easy to see from there, but she's got long reins, and all I'm doing is looking to the next one. So some of the early one that I showed you, she went to take another step and changed her mind and boinged in the air, which is really interesting, because that's like, us missing a step, when you've done that, missing a step going up or down. So I missed the affordance that she was giving because she changed her mind. Which is really interesting.
So any thoughts on this one, guys?
Just questions, really.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So the key variable or the key task constraint or thing you're manipulating is just playing around with the distances between the different jumps.
Between the jumps, yeah. So what I'm trying to do is get her to canter on a circle, and balance herself on that circle without me going, this is without me going slower, faster, this is the route. So it gives, by putting the crosses in, it gives her a very specific point to go towards that she needs to organize herself. And then, like Rob said, it's starting to get her to calibrate her time to take off for jumps, and then I can obviously ramp the jumps up once she knows the game. I mean, she's a very good show jumper. She's just 22. She's just retired, and bringing her out to have a play.
I like the different distances because it just means they're not reproducing a movement pattern. They're having to constantly readjust their movement pattern based on the distance to the next jump. So in terms of sort of perception, action, and adaptability, I think it's really interesting. There's some cool studies on long jump. I think Rob's probably more familiar with than I am, but sort of the variability of the stride length being altered as the skill, as opposed to the reproduction of the stride length. To the outcome, which is quite cool. Yeah, I like it.
Is there a reason why you didn't go for like different heights?
More because she's only been ridden once in 6 months. First of all, from moving and then COVID, and I thought actually that just makes it, if I'd managed to do a second session in video, I probably would. So one of the things, actually, I think you see at the end of that, she goes to the gate, and it was a 4th go. So one of the things I tend to do with my horses is give them some say in what we're doing, and so a short session, I try and keep those sessions really short so that she stays engaged in what we're doing. The key with that is really getting her to calibrate her canter so she doesn't land and rush off or rush into the jumps, and that she's able to really start to pay attention. When I first did it, so this is an example of one that gets used a lot within question coaching. When I first did it, I was told I had to get 4 strides between each jump. So as a rider, I had to land and then make a decision about whether I thought my horse was had jumped big enough or small enough, and then I had to either push or pull and fiddle and micromanage to get the right number of strides. So I flipped on its head completely and gone, I'm going to make them slightly squiffy, so it's still a diamond, but it's a bit skewy, and then I'm really going to make sure that I do not micromanage her.
Yeah, no, I really like that. Yeah.
What's next? What would you do next? That's the thing.
What would I do next? So probably what you said, I would change the heights of some of the jumps. So, but again, always balancing that so that she's sort of having to pay attention, read, but she knows where she's going next. So it gives her as much autonomy as possible. Within, she's been given a steer, because first of all, she knows the game, and also I'm looking where I want to go, but I'm not managing anything else. So yeah, I'd start to mix up the jumps and maybe pull two of them out a bit. So she's got a tighter bend and a wider bend. So I'm starting to get those transitions between different, for her to have to open and close the curvature of her body as she canters. So again, without me giving her specific instructions, that she can self-organize that canter to meet a task constraint.
And do you design your affordances and tasks around the horse, not around the rider, or the combination of the two? Because I find it fascinating.
I have PhD. Mostly actually around. Well, I do talk about it as like a shared affordance, but I'm designing it around my horses primarily, and designing it around them being the ones that are responsible for finding the affordances of whether something's jumpable.
Mm-hmm.
And that would include whether or not they think I'm being a pain in the ass or I'm going to disrupt them.
And you becoming more attuned to when that is and when it isn't.
Yes,
is that the idea? You're beginning to sense that more.
Yeah. So I mean, it's very easy if I micromanage it. I know we're going to take off, But if I'm not micromanaging it, I need to pay more attention to what my horse is doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To not being like boinged out of the saddle, like it's like the I don't know, missing. I always describe it that one of the things about balance is that anticipation, isn't it? Understanding our environment, understanding a surf wave or a ski maneuver or something, or running up the stairs in the dark and missing the last step is the same kind of thing. It's not your balance, it's that cued into perception of understanding of the affordances and being able to anticipate a movement.
Mm-hmm.
Would there be any value in, for example, once she's become very used to, kind of following in a certain way and maybe following in a different way, going the opposite direction, would there ever be any value in, for example, having somebody on hand who then puts another obstacle in somewhere that's a little unexpected to see how she responds to that, or would that be something you wouldn't do?
It's a good question. I'm quite wary about doing something that the horse wouldn't be able to anticipate in a way. Does that make sense? I kind of really don't want to trick them.
No.
I want them to learn to trust the environment they're reading. Although they do, when they're on a course, they need to listen to me. So, like if you watch sometimes you watch, Show Jumper, and they go and turn a corner and the horse goes, oh, that one. And they're like, no, not that one. Don't go
I was thinking more of the context of like when you make a mistake, like, when your guide is wrong
Mm-hmm.
and they take over and go, no, we're doing it this way. So I was almost wondering whether you would learn something in terms of your attunement to her. If, for example, there was something there that was not supposed to be there, to see what happens as a means by which for you to become more attuned to her. I don't know. I was just throwing it in as an idea.
Do you mean like an obstacle in the way that she wouldn't be able to go around?
No. So just something quite. I was just thinking like a pole or something. Something's not supposed to be there, but it just creates a different focus or a point of awareness. I don't know. There may not be any value to it whatsoever. I just wondered if it would be valuable.
Interestingly, I'd use things like, so if I've got a horse that, again, that rushes, you would often put a pole out early because the horse has to sort of like negotiate the pole, and then it hasn't got too long to end up running into a jump.
Right.
But that would be because of a problem. Or you can put one on the other side if they do the same thing, they land and run off.
Yeah.
Or land and they don't look down because a pole on the ground makes them look. So again, it's shaping, like down, like, with the header, it's shaping a little bit of their physical response to try and disrupt a movement pattern that they've already developed. So yeah, the interesting thing for me was to put something in there and just go, somebody who's who's not used to doing stuff with horses, how what does it, what are your thoughts? What are the things that you could add in to experiment with?
Yeah.
one of the things that occurred to me was, if you were in a truly representative environment, which I'm assuming is a show jumping competition,
Yeah.
there's got to be a lot going on in that for a
That's
horse.
why I let Snoopy run round and the other horse be in the corner. My mum's stallion's field next door.
I was wondering that whether it's by accident or design, Snoopy plays an important role.
Yeah. Many a time when the shows, when there are dogs running riot and my horse is the only ones that just ignore them completely. And having that distraction, and I do, I occasionally put balloons up around the side or an umbrella or something like that, just to, so that they can't just be, expect there to be this, benign environment all the time.
Interesting.
I really like you're teaching her, for me, like, develop muscle synergies and functional variability instead of like figuring out how many steps. That's such, to get that right would be so hard. Instead, you're teaching her.
You have to like micromanage the horse, which just for me is.
So you're teaching her, if I do a slightly longer step this time, I can do a slightly shorter one next. So she, like I always, my saying, I said, error correction is the horse's job, right? Not your. Right?
And when you start putting the jumps up, she's got to recalibrate all that, because if the jump, she's got to take off further away, she's got to land further away. Now that gap's different.
Yeah.
So
that's
you
really
can't
cool.
expect them either.
Yeah, I love not that horse it isn't invaluable in and of itself, but having to see how you train animals when you can't use verbal instructions. You can't throw agility ladder on the ground and expect her to step in, right? So
and we're going to stay away from force. We're going to stay away from using constraints that reduce, that force of movement. We're going to stay away from just this, stimulus response. So where do we go?
I think that's really interesting. Sorry, I didn't mean to, I was switching videos right when I was saying that. This is one this is a very simple one that someone sent me. It's not much, or maybe kind of more generally we can talk about that. This is something that we do in a lot of different sports, right? Let me get this on the screen. So this is basically training deception. Right, so this is basketball. This is training a hesitation move to get around a defender, right, or to throw off a defender. So the person's adding in a pause, I think, in their shot. So you would assume that would knock off a defender. Okay. Okay. So maybe from both, we could think about this from both sides, training how to deceive and how to avoid being deceived as a defender. So any kind of general thoughts on that?
I mean, it's missing a defender if deceiving is the key intention. You might get a bit of benefit in the ball handling and the footwork elements associated with stopping and going again, but I think you would struggle to form any functional relationship in terms of timing and distances and cues of when from the defender. So while you might have a nice move, if you like, your ability to apply that move in context, I think, wouldn't be developed through this type of practice. Interestingly, the question is, will developing the move out of context or without defenders help them when they're then doing the move in context, or actually will it hinder them? It's a really interesting question. Or is it just neutral, as in it doesn't do either? It is a question I constantly ask. That's probably my initial thoughts watching it.
You have mellowed, Danny.
I'm just quickly, because I was thinking, why have they not used the other person as a defender? I mean, that because you've got two people there, haven't you? And I thought, why is he just standing there when he's trying to teach? I don't know. I was just like a bit perplexed. I'm going to turn my mic off because he's going to bark in a minute.
Yeah, I was the same. I mean, you've got somebody else there. I mean, that's a great opportunity to utilize them as a as a kind of an opportunity to co-adapt. And actually what you got them is just feeding the ball back to you. That's a pretty passive and boring experience for them. And you're not getting the value from the experience, which is kind of a strange thing to do.
It's like that video on you shared where there was the ball throwing machine and then like 6 people were standing around waiting for their turn to have it fed to them. And I was like,
if you watch elite players though, if they're working on in hockey, just working on a new drag or a new elimination, when they're warming up, they will do it in like a non-contextual environment just to feel it and just to get and understand which way my body goes. But I haven't quite got it right in the practice. So they might have missed the drag in the practice, which means they didn't eliminate or they didn't deceive in this instance, for example. So when they come out of the practice or they've got a rest period, you'll see them pick a ball up and like just try and sort of pick the movement up and practice it before they then go back in. I guess the question is, it's just because that's what they want to do. Is it actually helping them? I don't disagree. I'm not that mellow. Why isn't the guy defending?
No, I think you do see that a lot in a lot of different sports. Players practice these pre-programmed kind of stereotyped deceptions. But I'm the same as everyone. Agility and deception has a purpose, right? It's to get around a defender. And when the defender's not there, right, it's driven by information. It's driven by where would you ever do that move if the defender's 10 feet off from you, right? No, you would just shoot, right? So it's driven by information. So, to me, you always want the information there. Then you're going to know if it works, see the result from the defender and stuff. So, yeah, I think that's
the timing thing is probably the most crucial thing for me in terms of that's so hard to learn. It takes so many goes to learn like how have I set him up, the deception in there. I think so important. So I think you'd end up with really nice moves, but you wouldn't be able to time them right, and you wouldn't be able to do them at the right time. I guess the question that sometimes I ponder is: have elite players earned the right to do some more decontextualized stuff because they can imagine the defender, they know what good feels like, they can sort of self-regulate a little bit better? I don't know the answer to that, but it's something I've always pondered, is when non-elite players or sort of beginner players do or sort of start to learn actions, they tend to cheat the action and don't perform actions in a way that's going to be useful in the performance environment. Because let's say they're learning to shoot with no defenders in basketball, and that study shows that didn't transfer across. But if you've got a really well-developed shot and you're a really experienced basketballer, is there value in practicing unopposed? It's a question I ponder a lot at the minute.
Well, there's the difference between you said something earlier, Danny, that was quite important, I think, which was when an individual is working through a movement pattern, they discovered something in the game and then they then go away and they go, right, I want to. So that's really important, because it's obviously got situated meaning for them. They've decided, okay, I've seen something now. Now I'm going to just take myself out of that environment and try and explore the movement that's going to help me to be able to perform that again. Again, does it transfer? Who knows? But that's very different, isn't it, than I'm just going to work on this movement. Because that, now if, for example, that individual had gone similarly, I've discovered this in the game, I need to learn how to do this kind of stop and go type activity, fine. But the fact that it's like being repeated on one side then the other on one suggests to me that it's based on that sort of fundamental misunderstanding that if you learn to move in a certain way, then that'll turn into skill magically. Well, only if you've got the information.
I don't think that practice there will transfer. The question is, because there's something missing in between the two. So the question is, like, obviously the more representative the practice is, the more likely we're going to facilitate some transfer. So it's missing those are the key cues around the defender. So we know that. So unless it's practice with a defender, it's incredibly unlikely that will transfer appropriately across. I'm fully with that. I guess the question is some practice beforehand useful for them when I practice with a defender, or should we just scrap any practice like that and just get straight into something with a defender? It's just
yeah. Your point earlier, Danny, is really interesting, because we often think of this type of isolated thing as you do with a novice.
Yeah.
But you're suggesting, maybe an expert has enough knowledge of they know what works in their imagery or whatever you want to talk about, that it might be more appropriate at that end. And then we got a question about this. I wanted to put up here. If you had a defender, how does the attacker actually get better? To me, the second part's more, how would you put any constraints on the defender, what the defender is doing to try to help the attacker develop the skill? Any kind of thought?
Like the way the defender defends will invite certain actions from the attacker. So this is where you get this kind of co-adaptation loop between attacker and defender coming on, which I find fascinating. So I know that if an attacker's working on a certain thing, or they get points for a certain thing, as a defender, I'll do my best to put myself in a position where they don't get those points or they can't practice it. And almost by doing that, I invite a different action, which isn't the one we're working on. So sometimes it's like, right, this guy's going to come in and try this deceive move like this. And I'm like, well, if I know he's going to do that, I'm going to do the exact thing that means he shouldn't do that. So yeah, like that's, then if you don't, so then you've got to think, how do I constrain the defender and force them to change their actions and behaviors to invite that move from that player? And that's where you've got to understand the sport and understand the layers of interaction between defenders and attackers. A bit like Marianne sort of gave us that detailed knowledge of the sport is the thing that allows you to make the simple task constraint manipulation, which on the face of it seems simple, but it's actually incredibly well thought through. Without the sport knowledge, I don't think you can get into that, or it's more difficult to anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I guess potentially if you know what about a move is deceptive. So, for example, there's research on rugby and things. We know what body parts are deceptive and those that aren't. Like your hips aren't deceptive at all. So you could potentially use that information to kind of build something on your own. But in the end, you don't know whether it's deceiving unless you know what the defender does, right? In the end. So to me, that's why you do them together. But that's an interesting question. Yeah.
I was going to say, one of the things that I played with, I know this is probably going to sound completely bonkers, is trying to work out what information my dog pays attention to when I'm throwing a stick. So I'll move bits of me, like my feet or my hips or my belly button, and see what he does. But what I've noticed is that he then adapts his behavior to what he learns I'm doing.
Yeah. Maybe what you want to do is kind of do, especially if they're more advanced players, kind of like the divergent evaluation. So 1 point for every deceptive move that works. That's different. You have to do a different one every time. You can't do the same. You
can't do the same one because your opponents are going to learn what it is that deceptive movement looks like, aren't they? And then it's not deceptive anymore.
And the point you make about deception is really important because, Rob, in order to deceive, you're not deceiving the air.
Mm-hmm.
You have to deceive something. Mm-hmm. So that implies that something needs to be there to be deceived. Yes. Otherwise, it's just a movement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I guess the point is what you're rewarding with this practice. If you're rewarding points for every time you've managed to off-balance the defender or create a yard of space or deceive them, then that's brilliant. And you're not that fussed about the movement element, then I think you can't do that without defender. That's just
I do think the second part of the question is an interesting one, and it's one that I get quite a lot. And I think it's this idea that if you have a defender there, then they don't get enough success, and so it's too difficult for them, and then they're going to then lose motivation and confidence. I hear that a lot, and I think it's worth pointing out that so there are a number of ways that I can think of that you might constrain the defender. For example, you might limit what they can do with their arms, so they're only able to move in a particular position in order to block off the run, or you might maybe limit the number of steps that they can take or something along those lines. So there may be some things you could do to constrain the defender that would then give an attacker an advantage, but I think that would lose the sense. I think it's kind of missing the point that actually creating the deception is the task, not the move, not being successful at the movement. And that's the problem I think people have, is they think you're trying to train the movement. No, you're not. You're trying to train the deception, and the deception might involve lots of different movements.
Yeah.
Interesting. Some players will say, even though they know what the player's going to do, and even though they know they're trying to deceive them, they still fall for it every time. I find fascinating. It's almost like there's just too much information coming that just makes me feel like that's going to happen, even though I know it's not, and I can't help but react to it. I find that really interesting as well.
Yeah.
I think a basketball one, if we're talking basketball, one thing, for example, you could do is you could constrain the defender. You could like bind their arms or something, so they can't defend so they can only defend by body position, getting in front of so that would make it harder. That would train both people at the same time. I think, make it harder for the defender to defend and then make it easier for the attacker in some way. Yeah. Marianne, did you?
Yeah, I was just thinking about some of the stuff that I think about doing, certainly within paddle sports and probably within horses as well. When you've got somebody who's learning and you've got an environment that's quite complex, you can use the other person. So I'm thinking maybe having two people learning to be in a tandem canoe. If they're both complete beginners, they never know whether what they did was what caused the outcome or whether it was the other person who also doesn't know what they're doing. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? And so I would always put somebody who's quite skillful in a boat with a complete beginner, because they can reduce that search space. They can kind of it's almost like they dampen the amount of complexity if they can do it skillfully, so that the person who's less skillful can explore a little bit and get a little bit more fidelity back. So I was kind of thinking, and maybe in this environment, having somebody who's more skillful as a defender, who can maybe provide a different level of challenge, but also dampen out some of their responses. Am I making sense? To help get a little bit more fidelity in terms of picking up what the results of their actions are. So it's almost trying to make it a little bit. It is a real big manipulation of the constraints. But lots of beginners are really random. In some places.
Like a really good squash coach when they're training a beginner. What they're so good at is managing affordances for that learner based on how well they're doing and narrowing the focus.
Exactly. Can I make this a little bit more high validity learning environment for you by just constraining the affordances a little bit more for you?
Yeah. The last one, maybe we can do one more, guys, if you have time. This one is Stephen Henry sent this one in. It's the GAA coach, which is, he tells me, it's like Aussie rules football. This is, I wanted to pick this one in because it's probably representative of what a lot of people have experienced over the last while. This stuck at home training by yourself kind of technical drill. So it's a drills he's been developing to work on toe tap or foot pass with the other foot, kind of some kind of technical drills. So let's see what this looks like. Here we go. I think it's just a really short one too, I think. Okay. So any thoughts on that?
Do you not immediately think Bradman with his cricket stump and the water tank?
True.
This is very typical for what's going on in terms of sort of garden training and distance training, isn't it? And how do we make the most of these environments? Obviously, there's some real limitations in terms of the represented design, and I think the ball looks like it's rebounding off a wall, so like the cues that the ball coming towards you are removed. It looks like the pattern's set, so it's kind of a repeatable pattern that they're asking them to perform. I think the way that where the Bradman one is different is the variability that came from the ball coming back off the water tank actually posed a different question, which forced him to find a sort of different solution every single time. So yeah, I guess it challenges me because it is a drill and it is repeatable. I guess, is there a way of doing it better? So how would we make this more like a game, more variable, within the constraints of just one person with a ball and a wall? Over to Stu with gamification. I can see you thinking, and that's why.
Yeah.
Well, to me, it's like your point is why do you need the pre-designed pattern? So you've got to do this, then kick up, then you do the catch, then you do it over there. And so, for example, I would just want to be trying to find loads of different ways of adding in some variability. And I would be thinking about, right, what's the different manipulations that you could put in there? So, for example, you mentioned Bradman with the water tank, but he was also using a really thin piece of pipe to play. And I think it was something like a golf ball or something very small. So at the very least, could we do something along the lines of that, whereby we play with a ball that is either a different shape, a different size? I'm thinking one of those sort of funny knobbly balls that will bounce off in different directions to give you some element of surprise and reaction that you've got to do, depending on what your intention is. If it's purely about having loads of goes at catching a ball and kicking a ball, cool. Got lots of ways of doing that. That's okay. But if there's a bit of actually, we want to add a bit of skill into this somehow, and we want to develop our capabilities to adapt to different ways in which a ball might move. I'd be keen to try and find either a surface change or a equipment change or a spatial change of some kind that would constrain in some way, so that it wasn't a continuously I'm just doing the same thing and it's quite monotonous. And also for pure enjoyment, to have something slightly different that might engage the brain a little bit more and make the individual think about the way things are moving. I would just be, that's just kind of me.
I'd quickly look at how stable they become at doing a practice like that, and therefore how would we then destabilize it further, which I guess leads to your point as well. Sorry, Marianne. Yeah. All over you there.
Marianne, you're muted, Marianne.
Oh gosh, I've been muting out.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, I think with this one, it made me think about the discussion we had actually on the podcast quite a while ago about, sort of what can you do at home while we can't go and do the animal practices. And I just always think, I like both Danny and Stu alluded to there, that it's better to have something that's completely different, but is actually still a genuine activity. So it could be the wrong ball and a different environment, but you still have this, authentic perception action coupling and responding and learning to pick up what the affordances are and becoming more skillful at that in something that's totally different to what your normal environment might be, then to come up with like this, prescribed pattern drill that you just execute a movement pattern out of context. They're different things, aren't they? And I would still always go, why don't you just learn something completely different? Go, all I've got is a dog ball or a Kong or something, that does move around randomly. Let's just make up a game with that. But at least I'm learning to pick affordances, make decisions, find movement patterns in an activity that might be completely bonkers, but it's genuine and authentic.
Use a rugby ball.
Yeah, just do something else.
Same, yeah.
And then just go, actually, this isn't representative, but I am learning to learn. I am learning to work out what the affordances are in a completely new environment, and it's authentic. And then go and do some dancing or some, I don't know, the dance activity that is about prescribed pattern. For me, I struggle with something where it's a rehearsed movement.
I think it'd be better just to get rid of the cones and make a box.
Yeah.
At least then, like, based on where the ball comes to me, I've got to catch it, make the next movement, and then get it back to a target.
Yeah.
I'm allowed to organise in and around that task, as opposed to you must do it from this cone to this cone and then kick it.
Yeah, exactly.
And that can maybe at least loosen the degrees of freedom a little bit and make it a little bit more variable. Rob, sorry, I jumped in there.
No, that's fine. I like the constraints in this. You're constraining, the space and adding the difficulty. So it's not anything. One thing I thought about doing when you're really, really stuck at home and you have no one else to work with, you have no other, I like all the variability suggestions people have had. That is one thing you could do is you could try to recreate with something where we do in the lab, where you basically create an auditory stimulus. Like you could create yourself saying something or a bunch of songs or make a recording, and you have to switch what your skill you're doing every time, whether it's this song or whether it's saying a number, or it's not the coupling we want, right, to the information, but it's going to make you kind of paying attention to what's going on and switch kind of quickly to doing something else and add some variability in response to that. So that's something I would try if I was really stuck at home and I had no other way. Or you could do a visual one. It would be even nicer if you could put a display up and have it, every time you say, because then you would have to actually be looking around the visual field as well too. But that might be a bit more tricky, and you might break your screen too. So no, I'm not. Don't listen to my advice.
But like
on the wall when we were juggling. Go on.
Yeah.
When I was little, you had to. You could spell things or something. You write on it and go, I need to spell so you had to hit certain letters. I don't know. There's. I guess just being really creative is the. There,
but like you said, the simplest variations though, like that. I mean, for example, Rob, what you could have is a video playing of your highlight reels, like a highlight reel you'd see on YouTube of all the great like GAA catches, and like just recreate them. And just watch them play through. Oh, I want to play that one, right? I want to do that one, right? Kick it up, catch it like that, and just do those, and then do the next one coming through and do that again, and then just sort of play it on a loop and try and then just create natural variability through that. I really like the auditory and the visual stimulus. I quite like that. That works quite well.
So I asked, there's a hockey coach in England. He's actually from Trinidad originally. And he's one of the world's best players, but he's brought up in Trinidad. And I said to him, how did you get so good, like in Trinidad? And he said he used to get the videos of the World Cup and the Olympics. He'd watch what the players did in the games, and then he'd go and take his bag of balls down to the pitch and practice it until he could do it better. So like I really like that idea, because it does the kind of. There's so many examples of players, the ones who've got to the right of the elite, where they've done more, they've stayed later, they've done extra. They've practiced diligently. So yes, the quality of the practice is important, and the representative nature of the practice is important, but I think more time with the ball in your hand, practicing GA skills is going to help. I think so. Yeah, I've probably got less critical of things like this over the time, but I think we can potentially do them a little bit better.
I think there's a lot in looking at the videos, and I've certainly watched. Sometimes when I'm coaching, certainly on paddle sports, if I've got somebody who's more skillful, I'll get them to just do a couple of tricks or things that I think are nearly in the ability of the other people, because it kind of opens doors of their imagination, ways of doing things they wouldn't normally think of. So I kind of use that, so going and just practicing something that you've seen someone else do that you wouldn't normally be in your repertoire, I think is really good. It's really fascinating. And I like to think of, quite often I use visual demonstrations to spark imagination rather than to give a technical template.
Yeah, I think the key, you want to make these kind of the techniques when you do them somewhat unpredictable, whether it's either a ball bouncing weirdly or you triggered by a visual, or else, because when you just kick off a wall, you're going to kick in a way that makes the next response timed easily. You're going to get in this natural rhythm, but you want to be able to do that move when you're slightly off balance one time, when you're reaching up the next time. And so, but yeah, no, but that is a very tricky, sorry. Okay. Well, I think we'll stop it there, guys. I think maybe we'll do this again if people listening want to send in more. I found that a lot of fun and really educational. So I think we'll sign off and say goodbye to everyone. Thanks for the questions and watching along. Okay. Thanks, guys.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
See ya.